I'll be talking on important definitions related to nutrition in ICU and why nutrition is an importance in ICU and what the recent guidelines say, which is the ESPEN guideline, that is European Society of Parenteral and Enteral Guideline for nutrition in adult critically ill patients, and ASPEN guideline from Society of Critical Care Medicine, that is American Society of Parenteral and Enteral Nutrition. It came in 2016, which is on critically ill adult patients about nutrition in ICU. Nutrition risk assessment, then I'll talk briefly on enteral and parenteral nutrition and their provision in ICU settings. And also in nutrition, in special clinical situations of ICU, especially in septic shock and ARDS, as most of the abdominal and other aspects has been covered previously. What is standard therapy? Standard therapy is provision of only IV fluid, no enteral or parenteral nutrition, and advancement to oral diet as tolerated. This is the standard therapy. But what is medical? Hello? Yes. What is medical nutrition therapy? Medical nutrition therapy is provision of either enteral or parenteral nutrition to critically ill adult patients along with supplemental oral if feasible. Then the medical nutrition therapy is completely different from the standard therapy. It is isocaloric diet. It is energy administration of around the defined target, what target we are going to achieve for our patients, and almost achieving that target is isocaloric. Hypocaloric is underfeeding when we are achieving less than 70% of the target, and overfeeding if it is we are achieving more than 100% of the defined target. What is low protein diet? It is the protein less than 0.5 gram per kg per day should not be practiced. And trophic feeding, it is minimal administration of nutrients for the beneficial effect of gut for enteral nutrition. Coming to the guidelines for ASPEN guideline on critically ill adult patients and the recent ESPEN European Society guideline published in 2019 and the ASPEN in 2016. All of the presentation and the contents are based on these important guidelines only. What is the diagnosis tree for malnutrition? The diagnosis tree for malnutrition, at one extreme we have hunger related malnutrition or malnutrition due to socio-economic or psychological related. These are malnutrition without the disease when patient is not getting the food, and in between is the disease related malnutrition due to some gut pathology or chronic illness, and another is disease related malnutrition with inflammation, that is due to acute disease or injury related malnutrition. This is the place where our critically ill ICU patients sit. Why the critically ill patients are at risk? Because they are in acute stress, and we have seen that almost 40% patients had pre-existing malnutrition, and these critically ill adult patients have altered metabolic pathway, that is they shift from anabolic to catabolic state, increased gluconeogenesis, glycogenolysis, there is glucose intolerance and insulin resistance in critical illness, and increased oxygen consumption and increased cytokine release. All these contribute to critically ill patients are at risk for malnutrition. Coming to phases of critical illness, acute phase and the late phase. The acute phase is early acute phase which lasts for 1 to 2 days of onset of critical illness, and the late acute phase from 3 to 7 days, that is within a week. The acute phase, which is the phase of catabolism, it plays a major role here, and after this 7 weeks and or the patient when they are improving in late phase or rehabilitation phase or chronic phase where slowly the anabolism part takes in. But most important is the acute illness where catabolism takes over from anabolism. So medical nutrition therapy should be considered for all patients at ICU as early as possible. What are the goals of nutrition in ICU? It is to preserve the lean body mass, provide substrate for metabolic function, modify the stress response, improve immune function, and prevent any metabolic complication. This should be our goals for nutrition in critical ill patients. At first, before proceeding for nutritional therapy, we should assess the nutritional status of the patient by taking these important aspects like detailed history and functional status, which is very much important. How was the patient functionally before he came to our ICU? A history of any weight loss before, and physical examination and anthropometrics like weight, height, body mass index, all these are very much important. There are some biochemical and laboratory tests like albumin, pre-albumin, retinol binding protein, ceruloplasmin, but these are not being practiced because these are acute phase proteins and they change in critical illness. And ultrasound is recently evolving, not yet gold standard for assessing the nutritional risk. After we assess the nutritional risk, we have some screening tools for assessment of nutrition, that is at risk patient like nutritional risk screening, which came in 2002 SPEN guideline NRS 2002, and the Nutrix score, and many more are there, but these two are very much important, that is NRS 2002 and Nutrix score, because these both take nutrition along with disease severity into account. See here, along with the other parameters like age, number of comorbidities, days from hospital to ICU admission, and interleukin 6 level is there, which is optional. Along with that, the comorbidities, that is the disease severity for grading in ICU, that is Apache 2 and SOFA score, which is taken into account. If Nutrix score is more than 5, then patients are at high risk for malnutrition. Similarly, NRS 2002, if the score is more than 3, then patients are at high risk for malnutrition. But no score is gold standard for assessing the nutritional risk. We have to focus on history, physical examination, functional status along with the scores. These have added benefit, not but solely have no benefit. For assessing the nutrition status, we have after assessment we have to plan for determination of energy need. We have to calculate the basal energy expenditure or resting energy expenditure, and then the total energy expenditure, which is different from basal energy expenditure by various factors which plays a role, like in critical illness, the activity factor, injury factor. But these equations are very much cumbersome to calculate, and there is various strategies are there to calculate the resting energy expenditure. What is gold standard in ICU setting? This is the indirect calorimetry is the gold standard, but it is not available everywhere, and it has its own demerits, being expensive and specialized staff is needed, and also critical ill patients, various other factors like contribute to its decreased sensitivity and specificity, like increased oxygen consumption. Then there is ICD, CRRT, any other factors. They basically decrease the sensitivity and specificity for indirect calorimetry. It calculates the basal energy expenditure by using oxygen consumption and carbon dioxide production. We don't have indirect calorimetry, and there are other predictive equations. Almost 200 predictive equations are there. One example is Harris-Benedict equation. These are also very much cumbersome to calculate, and they are affected by various non-static factors in these equations. So we usually follow the weight-waste equation, and we calculate the resting energy expenditure as 25 to 30 kilocalorie per kg per day. It is simple to calculate and easily available at bedside. After we calculate the basal energy expenditure and the energy requirement by weight-waste equation we follow, we should think for route of nutrition. As per the ASPEN guideline, oral diet is always preferred over enteral or parenteral if the patient is able to eat. If oral intake is not possible, then early enteral nutrition, that is within 24 to 48 hours of ICU admission, should be performed rather than delaying any enteral nutrition. And early enteral nutrition is always performed than early parenteral nutrition. That is, What is most important is the think for early enteral nutrition. If there is any contraindications to oral or enteral nutrition, then only should think for parenteral nutrition, and that too within 3 to 7 days of ICU admission, never before that. And it is always being advised to avoid overfeeding. Overfeeding is always associated with increased mortality, any other various complications there in critically ill ICU patients, and early full enteral or parenteral nutrition should not be used, but it should be gradually proceeded within 3 to 7 days with almost 80 to 100% requirement achievement by 7 days. Coming to route of nutrition, if our GI tract is functional, yes, then enteral nutrition is preferred. Enteral nutrition can be standard nutrients or some specialized formulas in various disease states. If there is no functional GI tract, then think for parenteral nutrition. Parenteral nutrition can be central parenteral nutrition through central venous catheterization or peripheral parenteral nutrition. Enteral nutrition is always preferred. Why? It maintains the GI tract structure, integrity, and function. It is easier and more physiological. It enhances the intestinal immune function and maintains the villus height, integrity, and secretory IgA level. It reduces the bacterial translocation and thereby sepsis. It is associated with fewer complications than parenteral nutrition. I will be dealing with later on. And the last and not the least is it is less expensive always. That's why always prefer enteral nutrition and early enteral nutrition in critically ill ICU patients. The early enteral nutrition, what are the advantages? The guidelines have reviewed various meta-analyses and they have reviewed that early enteral nutrition compared to delayed enteral is associated with mortality benefit, and also the early enteral nutrition is associated with less infectious complications when they compare early enteral to early delayed enteral. That's why early enteral nutrition, that is between 24 to 48 hours of ICU admission or as early as possible, should be administered. The guidelines have reviewed early enteral versus early parenteral nutrition, and in critically ill patients, it has been seen that the infectious complications are very less when early enteral nutrition is preferred compared to early parenteral nutrition. After proceeding for early enteral nutrition, we should not forget the protein requirement. Protein is most important building block, and we know that 1 gram of protein almost gives 4 kilocalorie of energy. And most important is to prevent protein breakdown, we have to maintain the positive nitrogen balance. What is nitrogen balance? Nitrogen balance, that enough non-protein calories is mandatory. That is, your total energy expenditure should be provided by the NPCs and divided through fat and carbohydrate. That is almost 70 to 30 ratio of carbohydrate and lipids we use. And proteins should not be used for calculation of the energy expenditure, and we should give 1.2 to 2 grams per kg per day of protein in critically ill adult patients. This is the various situations and the protein requirement what we follow in medical ICU. 1.2 to 2 gram per kg body weight per day, this should be fulfilled, and we should review for protein requirement on daily basis. Then comes the enteral nutrition. How to plan for dosing of enteral nutrition? That is, glucose requirement minimum 20% and fat is maximum 80%. We usually follow glucose to fat ratio 70 to 30 and or 60 to 40. Protein is 1.2 to 2 gram per kg per day, and the calorie density is almost isocaloric, that is 1 to 2 kilocalories per ml of feeding solution, and the water volume, that is 30 to 40 ml per kg per day unless there is any restriction. We have to plan an enteral feeding regimen, then we have to calculate the calorie and protein requirement, and we have to select the feeding formula. Then we calculate the infusion rate, either we give the bolus feed or infusion feed, that is continuous feed, and we review the desired infusion rate, and we have to adjust the protein intake and give at least 1.2 to 2 gram per kg per day of protein. Coming to tolerance of enteral nutrition, one should not inappropriately seize enteral nutrition for any procedure or diagnostic test. The NPO time should be minimized, and GRVs, that is gastric residual volume, should not be used as a part for routine to monitor tolerance, and one should not hold enteral nutrition for only GRVs less than 500 ml or there is diarrhea. One should work up for diarrhea rather than stopping enteral nutrition in diarrhea. It has been seen that the post pyloric feeding is associated with increased tolerance compared to gastric feed, but there has been no other outcome benefits has not been associated with post pyloric feeding. So if there is intolerant to this gastric feed, we can think for post pyloric enterolysis and consider prokinetics whenever it is feasible, and from bolus to can consider for continuous infusion feed if there is intolerant to enteral nutrition. But before proceeding for parenteral nutrition, if enteral nutrition is intolerant, then these therapies and diagnostic aspects should be kept in mind. Coming to some specialized enteral nutrition, very much controversial also. The guidelines say that do not routinely use immune modulating enteral formulas in mixed ICU setting. What are the immune modulating enteral formulas? Like arginine, glutamine, EPA, DHA, they have no role till now. And for medical ICU patients, there is always no for these immune modulating enteral nutrition. We can consider in traumatic brain injury or surgical intensive care units, but for medical ICU patient, there is a straight no to these immune modulating enteral formulas. For anti-inflammatory lipid profile like omega-3 fatty acids, also there is no recommendations, and combination of antioxidants, vitamins, trace minerals in appropriate doses, that is almost 5 times the RDA, not more. What happens there in shock? Can you delay enteral nutrition? In shock, there is controversial topic, but uncontrolled hypertension and if there is escalating dose of vasopressors, then can delay the enteral nutrition, but always rethink. And hemodynamic and tissue perfusion goals are if not achieved despite resuscitation, then enteral nutrition can be delayed, but there is provision of considering trophic feed, that is almost 10 to 20 ml per hour or almost 500 ml per day of enteral nutrition should be considered in shock patients. In active upper GI bleed can delay enteral nutrition, but always rethink for enteral nutrition once there is no rebleed or bleeding has resolved. If there is over bowel ischemia, then it can be delayed, or if there is high output intestinal fistula with no reliable distal feeding assays, then it can be delayed, or in abdominal compartment syndrome, not in intra-abdominal hypertension. Coming to parenteral nutrition. Parenteral nutrition is process of supplying nutrients by IVSS, that is it can be either total parenteral or peripheral parenteral nutrition depending on the osmolality. For peripheral parenteral nutrition 600 to 900 millismoles per liter given to peripheral vein, or central when it is more than 1800 millismoles per liter. There are parenteral nutrition available in commercial available bags, or we can be compoundedly prepare it by using separate mixture of amino acid, dextrose and lipids, but both are being same. The TPN contains dextrose solution almost 25 to 50%, amino acids 7 to 10% with mixture of essential and non-essential amino acids, lipid solution of 10 to 20%, intralipid. The lipid solutions are less osmolar, can be used peripheral line, but most important culprit is this dextrose solution which are hyperosmolar with more than 25 to 50% dextrose should be given through the central line. And consider electrolyte, micronutrient, and always monitor for refeeding syndrome when patient is on both enteral and parenteral nutrition, especially patients on parenteral nutrition. The peripheral parenteral nutrition, it contains 10 to 20% of dextrose, almost 3% of amino acid, or intralipid 10 to 20% in combinations. When to start? Parenteral nutrition should not be started until all strategies to maximize the enteral nutrition and its tolerance. For supplemental parenteral nutrition, that is, when enteral nutrition is not able to achieve the goal, that is target energy requirement, then start only after 7 to 10 days, irrespective of the nutrition risk. That is, supplemental parenteral nutrition should be started only after first week. Do not start before 1 week, first week of ICU admission. And supplemental parenteral nutrition, if it is unable to meet more than 60% of target, then only think. Otherwise, try to achieve by enteral nutrition. Prior to 7 to 10 days, there is no improvement or even it can be detrimental. And do not use routinely parenteral glutamine solution. Enteral nutrition versus parenteral nutrition, it is very much advantageous. I told it before. Coming to parenteral nutrition is there is better attainment of nutrition goals. We know the target can be achievable, but it has lots of disadvantages like catheter related complications, sepsis, and other infection related aspects. There is hyperglycemia, hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis, and other electrolyte abnormalities, hyperglycemia in critical ill patient, hypercholesterolemia, and liver dysfunction. And most important is the refeeding syndrome and hypophosphatemia. There are some micronutrients, the recommended daily allowances, and the trace elements like these and should be supplemented along with enteral and parenteral nutrition, especially with parenteral nutrition. The electrolytes is not different from the enteral and parenteral nutrition, should always watchful, monitor and achieve the target electrolyte level, because these are the major part which is ignored, and in critical ill patients of ICU, they are very much vulnerable. They are in winning trials. They need appropriate and adequate supplementation of these electrolytes so that they can get rid of their other metabolic abnormalities due to electrolyte imbalance. I will not deal with other aspects which have been discussed before. I'll special emphasis on sepsis and septic shock. Always start enteral nutrition within 24 to 48 hours, and as soon as resuscitation is complete. Do not use exclusive or supplemental parenteral nutrition in acute phase of sepsis or sepsis shock. Trophic feeding should be considered in initial aspect for initial phase of sepsis without jumping into parenteral nutrition, and advancing age tolerant after 24 to 48 hours with slow advancement and achieving the goals almost 80% of the goal over the first week to prevent refeeding. And protein, should not forget 1.2 to 2 gram per protein per kg per day. Always hit for protein requirement daily, and daily assess your patient. Is my patient is getting appropriate protein? Is I should work for it and should deliver appropriate protein and electrolytes to this patient. Do not routinely use immune modulating formulas. There is very much controversial, not yet established anywhere. Coming to acute respiratory failure, there is no provision for high fat or low carbohydrate formula. Use normal polymeric enteral diet we will usually follow, because it has been seen that this high fat and low carbohydrate formula, is small settings only it has seen to be beneficial, but uh, when compared the recent studies, there is no beneficial, and it has been associated with overfeeding and its complications. Can consider volume restricted formulas and monitor serum phosphate levels and replace age appropriate. As told by sir before, serum phosphate levels are very much important, because phosphate is important new electrolyte which is very much ignored, and we almost 30% of patients in ICU have seen as hypophosphatemia, and when our patients are in weaning phase where phosphate is very much important. And chronic critical ill, that is critical ill patient with more than 21 days of ICU length of stay and persistent organ dysfunction. Always hit for high protein enteral therapy aggressively and effectively. Along with that, active exercise and rehabilitation is very much important in chronic critical ill patients. The key points are: always assure planning of optimal nutrition support, the integrated approach to route, timing, and calorie protein target. It should not be separated. Always these three things are a integrated approach. Prevent or detect any possible complications of your medical nutrition therapy. Monitor response to feeding and detect and treat refeeding as well. Detect and treat micronutrient deficiencies, maintain normoglycemia and serum electrolyte levels. Thank you.